Greetings, friends, and welcome to our Saturday edition of Countdown to His Coming. And as we're coming together, I took last Saturday off because of the Christmas holiday and have a lot of catching up to do. It's amazing how much stuff can happen in just a couple of weeks. And so as we're facing a brand new year coming, getting ready for the New Year's celebrations, all the football games yet to come, and some other things that are happening, what's really going on in the Middle East is the war nobody wants to call a war. It seems like the Pearl Harbor event, if you're looking for something to have really started it, took place on October the 7th with the invasion of Israel and the terrible, heinous attacks on civilians by Hamas. Israel's response has been quick and decisive. And in the world, people are getting divided. And I mean majorly divided on two sides as to whether they're in support of Israel or, strangely enough, in support of these terrorists. And this divide has created something that I believe was prophesied by Zechariah about the taking sides of nations of the world. The beginning of Zechariah talks about those that would side with Israel and be a part of their circle of influence, and yet the rest of the world seems to be bent on siding with the Muslim Arab nations, not the ones that are peaceful and looking for a peaceful solution, but those who are lining up with the terrorists, strangely enough, along the same battle lines you find predicted by Ezekiel in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, and lining up perfectly with all those little terrorist organizations surrounding Israel with Psalm 83. Well, yet another event has taken place in just the last couple of days. It seems that Israel, recognizing, as Iran has admitted, remember that's biblical Persia, Iran has admitted their involvement with these terrorist organizations and their attempts to destroy Israel. And so the Israeli forces have been making strikes against Iranian military leaders. Now, in case you haven't heard, here over the last couple of days, a group of Iranian leaders in their IRG Quds force, a force that Eric Stakelback says is very much like the Nazi SS would be. This group of leaders was gathering in, of all places, Damascus. Over and over, they've made Damascus a home base there in Syria, just to the north of Israel. They were gathering in Damascus for a conference, a planning session, maybe a strategy on how we're going to deal with Israel, how we're going to, proceed with this war, a war that nobody wants to admit is a war. Supposedly Hezbollah is not in the war, yet they constantly are attacking Israel on the north. There has had to be an evacuation of the border areas, rockets being fired in constantly. Hezbollah has a much larger force than Hamas. And the question is, when are they going to be a larger force in this war and begin to be more active at it? I mean, the war is already going on. It's just right now, it's kind of like the times in World War I when folks just stayed in their trenches and lobbed weaponry at each other from a distance before there was an actual attack. Well, this attack is going on. The war has been going on now, and it continues. But when these strategy leaders met in Damascus this week, they got a surprise. An attack, presumably by Israeli forces, killed 11 of those leaders, took out the head leadership of the force that Iran has been building north of Israel in Syria, presumably to attack. And so with this action, already angered by the assassination of one other key leader in the Quds force, the Iranian leaders are just throwing a fit about why it's absolutely necessary now to destroy Israel, ramping up their nuclear capabilities as they're continuing to enrich uranium for a supposed nuclear weapon that they are building. And you watch other nations that are part of that Ezekiel 38-39 list continue to rant and rave against Israel. Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, has all but called for an intifada against the state of Israel, that real Muslim nations should get behind him and the Ayatollah of Iran and take Israel out once and for all. Is this just rhetoric, or will something actually take place? Of course, one of those leaders in Turkey standing and making a declaration, calling on the name of Allah to destroy Israel, has a heart attack and drops right there on stage. It's like these things are happening over and over again, friends, and you may not be paying attention because we're too busy, caught up in our typical Christmas things, all the political stuff going on in America, states where either courts or some attorney general might be saying you're going to keep a major presidential candidate off our ballot. I mean, you got strange things going on in America, and it keeps us from looking at the place where biblical prophecy comes to bear, the Middle East. And if you look at that closely today, what you see is a circumstance that I want to get to by the end. Stick around. That really, I think, has us set up for the most momentous year ever, and that's 2024. What lies ahead for us is scary, no doubt, but I think it's prophetic biblically. Now, this attack on Damascus, many of which have taken place here in the last few years, reminds me of Isaiah chapter 17. Now, as you begin chapter 17 of Isaiah, here's what it says. Now, I'm reading from the Christian Standard Bible. There's an important reason I'm doing that. Listen to what it says. A pronouncement concerning Damascus. Look, Damascus is no longer a city. It has become a ruined heap. The cities of Aroer are abandoned. They will be places for flocks. They will lie down without fear. The fortress disappears from Ephraim, and a kingdom from Damascus. The remnant of Aram will be like the splendor of the Israelites. This is the declaration of the Lord of armies. Now, that phrase, Lord of armies, may be unusual to you if you don't read in one of these versions, but normally you'd see a phrase, Lord of hosts. Did you know those hosts, as it's translated in a lot of English translations, literally means armies? As we've been going through the book of Revelation, we see an invasion coming led by the Lord Jesus Christ himself at the head of the armies of heaven, the hosts of heaven. So who is the Lord? He is the Lord of armies. And so, yes, we like the wonderful, peaceful little Jesus that doesn't offend anybody and never makes waves. But the fact is, the Bible talks about him as ultimately a coming king who's going to be leading armies. And one of the declarations here is against the city of Damascus. Now, Damascus was destroyed at a time in ancient history. This occurred back in 732 BC. Was this prophetic of that event, or is it also foreshadowing a future event? Because right now Damascus has suffered an awful lot of damage during the Syrian civil war and isn't back to what it used to be by any means, but because it continues to be a gathering place for these enemies of Israel, the nation of Israel has found it an easy target for airstrikes to try to take out these enemies, just as what happened in the last couple of days. And so we're looking at a time where maybe here soon, because they involved themselves with this war against Israel that was prophesied by Ezekiel, that Damascus may receive even more strikes and may be practically destroyed as a city. Well, I want to call your attention to an article that I just read that was posted in the Telegraph. It was written by John Bolton. And John, of course, you may have lots of opinions about him. I have my own. But he's been right there in the center of everything going on around the world for some time. And he's got a lot of, if he plays it right, wisdom and knowledge that he can pass along to us. Well, there's an interesting premise right here at the very title of this article. It's entitled, "The West May Now Have No Option But to Attack Iran." Well, wow, this is something that folks have been talking about for some time, but why would we actually attack Iran? Well, guess what? Iran has been attacking us for some time. Remember, this is a one-sided war. It seems like from somebody's standpoint, it's already been declared. Since October 7th, there have been over 100 attacks on American military bases and facilities all over the Middle East. Where did these attacks come from? They've either come directly from Iran or from their proxies like the Houthis. Shipping is being attacked. Everything that's happening over there is going to be affecting you very soon. Prices are going to be going up on everything from the gas you fill up with in your tank to other, shall we say, material goods that pass through those choke points of shipping at either the Suez Canal or the Persian Gulf or the Mediterranean Sea. Now, why do I say that? Well, listen to the article. Bolton writes that Houthi attacks on commercial shipping and U.S. naval vessels in the Red Sea threaten the global economy, endangering the vital Suez trade route. Now, as if 14 such attacks in the past month and against Israel directly were not enough, Iran has now joined the fray. The Pentagon said on December 23rd that an Iranian-launched drone struck an Israeli-affiliated merchant ship in the Indian Ocean. Well, that's old news now. The attacks seem to be continuing as a whole new wave of Houthi attacks. Who are these people from Yemen that could have such sophisticated weaponry to attack ships? Well, they're another one of Iran's proxies, completely funded and equipped by the biblical nation of Persia, Iran. He writes that this marks the first time since October 7th that Washington has directly blamed Iran, even with over 100 attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria by Iran-dependent Shia militia, on which the White House has fudged in assigning responsibility. Tehran denied the Indian Ocean attack, repeating its mantra that Hamas operates independently and warring against Israel. Nevertheless, India deployed guided missile destroyers to the region and seeks more evidence on the vector of the attack. Now, all the time they are on one side denying involvement, they gladly took credit for it right after October the 7th. And so, it's almost like they're willing to let the West believe any lie they want to believe, all while they continue to pump money and materials into this war. We look at what's being discovered beneath Gaza, what explains where the millions and millions of dollars have been going, that have been funneled in for the help of the civilians in Gaza. These people are poor. They are used as human shields by Hamas. They have received no benefit from those funds. Instead, a military has been built. Someone said, this could have been the Singapore of the Middle East with all the money flooding into it. They could have created a wonderful economy and could have just been blessed and growing. And something very positive. Folks would have found it a great tourist destination. But instead, they've created a war state with only one purpose: destroy the nation of Israel and any Jews and Christians that would side with them. And therefore, it's become something that the revelation of just how expansive these tunnels are, how deep, how much money has been poured into their creation, and all the military equipment. All they've done is buy rockets, bullets, more weapons of war. And yet, we have an international community that I think is prophesied in the Bible, coming out of the United Nations. It seems oblivious to these things, and yet continually brings up resolutions against Israel. Why is that? Because the largest single block of nations within the United Nations that is firmly together on almost every point is the Organization of Islamic Nations, and those seem to be standing behind terrorists in these days, refusing to even call out their atrocities, and instead blaming Israel for everything. Friends, you and I are watching the last days unfold right in front of our eyes. Because remember, the eyes of biblical prophecy are Jerusalem. And as you look out from there, you're seeing these things take place on a day-by-day basis. Let me get back to the article. Just after Christmas, Iran committed the classic Washington gaffe, that is, telling the truth accidentally, when the Revolutionary Guards Corps reportedly described Hamas's barbaric assault as, quote, one of the acts of revenge for the assassination of General Soleimani by the U.S. and the Zionists. Oh, that's an interesting statement, isn't it? Yes, Hamas immediately denied the linkage, of course, no more credibly than the Revolutionary Guards Corps' subsequent effort to walk back the revealing revenge declaration. What do we have here? It's so obvious that it's easy for anyone to point out that's got a brain, but yet we continue to have these folks just denying the reality that's taking place in the Middle East. He goes on to say the critical truth here is that Iran has directly committed an act of war against what it believed was an Israeli target. While hardly comparable to Hamas's barbarity, Hezbollah and Houthi attacks or Iran's own massive arms and intelligence support, Tehran has now crossed the line of armed hostilities. The West's operating assumption should be to expect more of the same. Iran has, for example, recently threatened shutting down commercial shipping across the Mediterranean. It is Iranian belligerence driving potential escalation, not Western self-defense. Now, the Biden administration, much of the media, and Iran's propagandists will probably continue ignoring the reality of who is calling the shots in this conflict. But the evidence is growing inexorably that October 7th was intended to draw Jewish blood to implement Soleimani's Ring of Fire strategy, with Iran pressing Israel on multiple fronts, directing operations via terrorists and state actors that it has armed, trained, and financed. And remember where a lot of that financing came from. Yes, Barack Obama famously sent plane load of cash to the Iranians, trying to placate them into a new nuclear treaty. The Biden administration has continued to do that, on one side saying, we support Israel and we're going to send help to Israel, while we send so-called humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, which we now are discovering exactly where that's going, and sending more money, releasing more money to Iran. Give me a break, friends. What do you think these kind of nations are going to do with that cash? Well, take a look. The missiles are getting bigger. They've got a longer range. The rebuilding of every time Israel manages to destroy some kind of Iranian facility, it gets rebuilt pretty quickly. Where's all the cash coming from? Iran by itself is a pretty strapped nation, but they've been allowed once again to sell their oil and rake money in, and to rake money in from the stupidity of American politicians, so that they're continuing to fund this war machine. Where are we going from here? Well, interesting, because listen to what Bolton says in his article. He said, was Hamas's brutal surprise attack a one-off gambit to see if Israel's government collapsed, to assess Western support for Israel, to block an Israeli-Saudi exchange of full diplomatic relations, or some combination? Was Iran waiting to see if Israel became bogged down militarily in Gaza and then decide on its next step? Now, these are good questions, but there are even more questions there that he doesn't ask. But listen to his answer. Or, he says, was Hamas simply the first Iran surrogate to launch? Hezbollah has fired rockets and mortars ever since, forcing Israel to evacuate citizens from a 2-kilometer wide strip along the Lebanon border. And while Hezbollah has not yet initiated a full-fledged attack, it has husbanded its arsenal, perhaps awaiting the opportune moment. Both Houthi and Shia militias' attacks have been met with only feeble and ineffective Western responses. Neither Hamas nor the Houthis nor Iraq militia have yet prompted the U.S. or Israel to retaliate directly against Iran. Now, obviously, Tehran does not feel pressured enough to restrain its surrogates, proving that the West has not established conditions for deterrence, thereby potentially cooling the conflict down. The White House and its media stenographers repeat endlessly that they do not want the current hostilities to spread, but Biden's non-strategy based on hope will not succeed. Only if Israel, America, Britain, and others show they possess the resolve and capability to impose significant costs on Iran as punishment for its aggression, will they persuade the Ayatollahs that proceeding further will bring them intolerable pain. Very likely, only direct military force applied against critical targets inside Iran will impose such costs, proving to Tehran it has miscalculated not only about Israel, but on President Biden and on the West more generally. That's why the evidence of a direct Iranian attack on a commercial ship in the Indian Ocean is potentially so important. It's been clear for years that overthrowing the mullahs, replacing them with some other form of government that enjoys the support of Iran's citizenry, is central to decreasing insecurity throughout the Middle East. Arab funding of terrorist actions against Israel is hard to find today, especially as full, open diplomatic relations with Jerusalem continue to expand. Now, if Iran's line of credit to the like of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis and other barbarians disappears, their ability to survive, except in remote Afghan encampments, will palpably decrease. That is the outcome Washington and London should seek, instead of pushing Israel for more pauses, truces, ceasefires, or the like. Allow Jerusalem to achieve its legitimate objective of eliminating Hamas as a military and political force. That is one sure way to convince the Ayatollahs their gambit has failed and their own end may be near. Wow, that's a powerful article. But where do you think it's going from here? I don't want to be a prophet out of step right now, but I'm looking at something in the United States of America that I think is going to drive the actions of those Middle Eastern rulers, these dictatorial despots, the Ayatollahs and the leaders like Erdogan in Turkey. They look at the United States, which is not acting and is almost acting like, all right, we're just going to sit here on defense, attack us another 100 times, and maybe we'll do something. And instead, what they're thinking is, wow, this is an election year coming up in America, and if you don't think they're trying to influence that, you've lost your mind. The billions of dollars that have flooded from some of those nations like Qatar into the United States, into some of our major universities that are moving these vast demonstrations. Where did all these Palestinian flags and all this other stuff come from? Well, all you got to do is follow the money trail. They know that this is a critical year in the United States of America. And yes, we are facing a country that unknowingly may be pushing itself into its own civil war, as they're setting up this picture where whoever wins in 2024 can be declared illegitimate by the other side. What's going to happen to the United States of America this year? This peaceful nation we have enjoyed for so long may be on the brink of a chaotic collapse. But the thing that the Ayatollahs cannot have happen is to sit back and wait to see if a more conservative regime is once again elected in the United States, with a powerful president, as President Trump was during his administration, who allowed none of this foolishness to go on in the Middle East, instead brokered historic peace agreements. Now, what's going to take place? Well, if you're one of those leaders, if you're one of those groups, one of those terrorist groups, you know that there's a window of opportunity, and it's now about a year from now that you've got this window open. And if you're really going to bring about some kind of attack on Israel, weakened from having to conduct this war against Hamas in Gaza, now is the time. You look at this weak administration in the United States and know that if you're going to do something and have time to act and to accomplish your goals, to fulfill your mission, which is the destruction of the Jewish state, you've got an opportunity here. And that opportunity might disappear if the election goes the wrong way in the fall. You've got to act, and you've got to act decisively, and you need to act now. Is that what's going to trigger all of this in 2024? Could this be the kind of timing that none of us wants to see, but there's nothing we can do to stop it? Oh, friends, we live in these biblical days, days of historic and prophetic fulfillment. We're watching these things take place and looking at the ancient scriptures that lined all these nations up and talked about these events, and marveling at how God in his timing and in his word knew exactly how all this was going to come to an end. But my friends, there's an even more glorious ending when it's over. Go back and read the rest of the book. We've just done all our Wake Up in the Word series, almost finished with the book of Revelation. And what that points to is a glorious new kingdom, a new heaven, a new earth, when the Lord of armies, the Lord Jesus Christ himself, returns. I hope you're ready for his return and are sharing his good news with everyone in these important days. Get ready. It's going to be I don't want to say it's a fun ride. It's going to be a scary ride through 2024 as we see how all these things are going to play out. You keep praying. You keep looking up, because, my friends, Jesus is coming. God bless you. I'll see you next time as we have another countdown to his return.